The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this February edition of the Polyphonic on-campus webinar series. This is Steve Daniel with polyphonic.org, and I'm very pleased to have two wonderful speakers with us this evening, Nina Perlov and Kurt Sassmanhaus. They're going to give a presentation on the topic you're seeing on your screen, Lessons Without Borders, Teaching Music in a Virtual World. So we're really looking forward to hearing their thoughts on this topic, which is, about technology and the possibilities of teaching remotely, which is really fascinating. So this webinar is the first in a series of 3 webinars for us this spring. So we certainly hope that you'll join us for those other 2 webinars. In March, a webinar on ensemble models for 21st century musicians. We're going to hear from 3 folks involved in 3 very interesting ensembles. And then in April, we're going to have a webinar on public speaking for musicians. So we really hope you join us for those. You can find out more details on polyphonic.org. And this webinar will be recorded, as are all of our webinars, and posted on the website within a few days. So if you want to review it or share it with a friend, it'll be up there. We certainly encourage that. So just a couple of logistics before we get started. Your phone or computer audio is muted by default, just to cut down on background noise. But we really encourage you to ask questions, and we'll have a question and answer period at the end of Nina and Kurt's presentation. And how we'll do that is you'll see a question box located on your webinar control panel, and you can just type a question in there at any point in the presentation, and we'll hold those to the end, and then we'll read them to Nina and Kurt and have them answer your question. So again, feel free to type in a question at any point, and we'll hold on to them and get to them at the end. So with that, I want to turn it over to Nina and Kurt, and I think we're going to have Nina first. So Nina, welcome, and it's all yours.
Well, thank you so much for having me here today. This is a fun topic for me. I am a flutist, and I have had the pleasure to experiment a lot with using the internet for teaching music. Everything from YouTube videos to webcam lessons and blogs. And so I'm happy that you invited me here today, and I can share some of what I've experienced and learned from this whole adventure of teaching music in a virtual world with you today. And in fact, the work that I've done online has earned me the nickname of the Internet Flutist. And so some of what I'll talk about today just gives you some ideas of things that I hope you'll all be able to use in your virtual teaching. And one of the main things that's so exciting about this topic is that it's constantly changing. And so what the tools that we have available today will be different even just a few months or a year from now. So it's important to try to do things like this particular webinar where you're talking to other professionals and finding out what the newest tools are available that you can use for your own teaching. So in my background, I did my undergraduate degree in music from the University of Michigan School of Music. And then, after that, I wanted to study the French School of Flute Playing in Paris, France. And, back in that time, which already seems so far away, I think it was 1995, the only way to study flute with one of the great French masters was to go to Paris. So I was very fortunate that I received a Fulbright grant, and I packed up and shipped several heavy boxes of my flute CDs and sheet music because we didn't have iPods and MP3 players back then. We had to actually transport our CDs with us. And I moved into a studio apartment in Paris, and I spent 2 years there studying the French flute school, which was an incredible, wonderful experience. In today's world, students have the opportunities to learn from great masters, and they don't always have to undergo the process of moving and relocating across the world to do that, which is very exciting. So Steve, if you could change to the next slide. So some of the sort of the old-fashioned way of studying music, which I still think is a great way to study music and is not at all obsolete, but it did have some limitations. For instance, what I was just talking about, the idea of region and having to be physically near your teacher in order to have the opportunity to study with that master teacher. You know, another one of the limitations of sort of the traditional model is that your learning time with that teacher was limited to the number of minutes or hours that you were actually face-to-face with that teacher. So if you had a 1-hour lesson every week, that was sort of the extent of your ability to be interacting with and learning from that teacher. You know, everything from just the complexities sometimes of scheduling could be a problem. I mean, sometimes you might have the proximity, but the teacher, you know, the schedule is already full, or you can only study, you're only available on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and that teacher is already booked Tuesdays and Thursdays. And so sometimes just details like scheduling can become a limitation to having access to the master teacher. And of course, cost is always a factor, and not just the cost of the lesson itself, but you have to get to that teacher, and that may be as small of a cost as parking or gas money to drive across town. In other cases, it could, you know, mean the cost of like what I had to do, which was to move from the United States to Paris and to, you know, be able to live and support myself for 2 years studying there. So the thing that I find is exciting is that our new technologies today are able to help us overcome some of these limitations. So Steve, if you could move to the new slide. So the new technologies can help eliminate some of these barriers to music study, but the #1 biggest concern that people have is, are these new technologies effective? So it's fine that we can now take lessons with a teacher without having to be in the same room at the same time, but can you still have a quality educational experience that you would have had, you know, had you been in the same room? So, you know, there's a lot of options, and I'm going to be talking about them today in my presentation. There are so many online music tools that we can use, and you know, they can range from simple course supplementation all the way up to sort of the webcam private lessons. Now, I cannot say that there have been any, you know, scientific studies to try to determine how effective these online tools are, but I can just tell you from my own experience, and I do teach both the traditional lessons where I am in a room with a student for an hour, giving them a lesson every week, and using online formats. And I have found that the results can be very, very effective, and that they depend largely on the quality of the teacher and the student. And we can go to the next slide. So in some ways, this is not new. I mean, this is the same major factor in determining if lessons were successful the old-fashioned way. I mean, there are good teachers and there are not so good teachers. There are engaged students and there are less engaged students. And there's always the question of a match between a student and a teacher. Sometimes a teacher can be a good teacher for some types of students and not for others. And finding that match remains an essential element of how successful the online teaching will be. So, you know, the more things change, the more they stay the same. It's still very much about finding a successful teacher and a good match between the student and the teacher. The one element that maybe is new in this mix is that both the teacher and the student have to be open to this concept of using technology to learn, and they have to be adaptable and willing to experiment and willing to understand that, you know, there may be some other limitations, but at the same time there are also other benefits. Good. Can we, I think we can go to the next slide. So I thought I would just sort of break down some of the ways I think about how I use technology and how you can think about the ways you teach online. And probably the thing you're most thinking about is just the webcam teaching, which I will go into depth about. But there's a lot of other ways that you can use online teaching as part of your overall teaching regimen. And so first of all, you don't have to do only virtual teaching or only the traditional teaching. Like I said, I use both methods. So supplemental virtual teaching is really when I think about a teacher and a student who already interact in person, sort of in the traditional lesson format. But the teacher is able to use virtual tools to act as supplemental resources to enrich and extend that one-on-one classroom experience. And they can be really helpful tools to add to what you're already doing with the student in the lesson. It can help connect the bridge between lessons. So if there's 1 week between lessons or 2 weeks between lessons, you can use these tools in the intermediary. And sometimes they can be great tools to help motivate your students to practice, because in a way they don't feel that you're so disconnected between your actual in-person lessons. And I think we can go to the next slide. And then, of course, all virtual instruction is when the relationship between the teacher and the student is never in the same place at the same time, and all of the interaction between that teacher and that individual student, is requiring some form of technology, and they don't have the traditional piece of it going on at the same time. Okay, I think we can go to the next slide. So I sort of mentally think about the different ways I work using online tools, and I can think of them really almost in 3 categories, which I tend to call read only, read react, and read react now. And what I mean by these 3 categories is they each reflect a different level of teacher-to-student interactivity. So how much is the teacher really directly engaging with and reacting to the student? So some formats are very strictly just one-way interaction. Some have a combination where there's a little bit of back and forth, and then the most interactive is like a real-time video web tool format. So if we look closely at read only, and we can go to the next slide for that. What I think of when and I just basically made up this terminology, by the way, read only, and it's just something that I've used in my own mind, so this is by no means sort of an official terminology. But I think of this as a unidirectional platform that offers an online content. And content can be text, it can be something you've written, it can be an audio recording or a video recording, which is content created by a teacher, which is then posted online, and the students can consume this material without ever having any interactivity with the teacher whatsoever. So it's just the students are consuming it anonymously, and once the teacher posts it, it just has its own life. And the teacher never engages in feedback or dialogue with the student. So some examples of that are YouTube. If you post a YouTube video, you can just post it, and then the world is free to watch it, and you don't even necessarily know who's watching it or how they're reacting to it, other than you might see the number of views you have, grow consistently, so you know there's some feedback there. And we'll talk a little bit about how even with YouTube you can have some interactivity. But blogs, for instance, can be just something you write and post. It's very much like parallel to just writing a book. you know, in the old-fashioned method where you could write a method book or you could write a treatise, and you publish it, and then it's distributed to the world, and that content is created, but there's no sort of living feedback, interactivity going on. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So read, react is what I think of when the content is created by the teacher, but there are some opportunities for discussion and interaction between the teacher and the content user or the student. And so the interaction can be very, very simple. It could just be, you know, an email that somebody writes and the teacher writes back. It could literally just be a comment that somebody posts on your YouTube video, a question, and if the teacher writes back to that question, then there is that interaction. So that YouTube video has gone from being a read-only format to now being a read-react format, where the student who has watched the video is now actually able to ask you a question and get an answer. And you can even do video exchanges where a student, for instance, records themselves in a video playing a piece of music and then sends the teacher the link, and the teacher might watch it 3 or 4 days later and give feedback back to the student. So there's a back and forth feedback going on, but the communication is not happening in real time. So in this read-react category, I think there's a wide range of how extensive it can be. It can be very, very limited, or it can really be pretty extensive if you're doing, you know, video exchanges, even though you're not talking back and forth at the same time on the same day. You can still have a lot of information transferred through that. So one example of this read-react format actually is this webinar, which right now, because I can't obviously hear any of the participants who are attending and listening in, I feel funny. I feel like I'm talking to myself, which is a strange feeling. So I feel very much like right now it's read-only. But when we get to the end of the presentation, you will be able to type in your questions and ask questions, and I will be able to react to you, and that increases our level of interactivity. Now, of course, people who listen to this webinar a week from now, when it's been pre-recorded, don't have that opportunity for the interaction. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So my third category, which I call Read, React Now, is really what I'm talking about when you have real-time conversations with people that come the closest to imitating being in the same room at the same time, the old-fashioned lesson. And so really what we have for that, the main tool, is the webcam lesson. And that can be using any one of many platforms, the most well-known probably being Skype. There are also Uvu and iChat and Google and Fuse, which is a platform I'll talk about a little bit later. And you're really imitating the experience of the live lesson. And you're seeing and hearing and reacting to each other just as if you were in person, which is exciting. We can go to the next slide. So just a few examples, and some of these I touched on a little bit. You know, blogs. You can put out your content, and then it's up to the teacher or the writer of the blog if you want that blog to be interactive or not. So you can write the blog, and you can choose to allow people to comment on it, or you can choose to not allow people to comment. Or you can allow people to comment, and you can make the choice that you will respond to their comments or not respond to their comments. So blogs can be one-directional, or they can have back and forth interaction as well. Non-customized videos, and what I mean by that is it's a video, instructional video that you make, which is not made for a specific person to watch. So it's a general video that's made for students to be able to watch anonymously. It's not like saying, I'm going to make a video for my student Susie who's working on this specific piece and has one specific question. It's a more generalized video with the content that can be used by many people. Video exchange is the one I was mentioning earlier, which is a way of having a high level of interaction but not having to be in the same place at the same time. So that's literally where you make videos for a specific person and you can trade them back and forth. And you can use different platforms for this that will, create like a private lesson room. Or you can use, just use YouTube, really, because what you can do on YouTube is you can set your videos to private, because usually in this video exchange I find that the students don't want the general public seeing their videos, and they don't want the general public seeing your comments back to them. It's more like a private lesson. So the student will make a video and they will send me the private link, and then on my own schedule, at my own convenience, I can watch the video, take notes, and then I can reply with a video where I can play back passages for them, give them instructions on what I think they need to work on. And then I send them back a private link to that video. And so that's a video exchange format. Facebook can be used as a form of interaction and teaching. I will post topics about music playing onto Facebook and ask people to comment and start a discussion and interact just simply with that. And that can be through private messages to individual students, or it can just be a post on my wall. And the same thing can happen, with email newsletters, with chat rooms. That you can create areas for discussion and learning. And one of the things that I should probably mention that is also interesting is that with a lot of these formats, what's exciting about sort of this social media component that's different from the traditional model of lessons is that you do really open up the discussion to a wider group of contributors. So, for instance, sometimes I'll have a video, an instructional video, and somebody might post a question in the comments, and it might be something like, what is the name of the piece that you were playing, at this certain part of the video? And sometimes I may not be able to reply right away. I might be traveling, or I think, okay, I'll try to reply to this message later tonight. And in the meantime, before I've had a chance to reply, somebody else will reply. Somebody else who's watching my video will see that person's question and will answer it. And as long as I see that the answer is accurate and correct, then I don't have to come back in and necessarily answer that particular question. And sometimes people will just raise questions for discussion on topics that are, controversial, or they want more feedback, and you'll get a lot of different people contributing. So that can be nice too. So the other thing about web lessons, when we're talking about something like a Skype, where you're really in real time, is that you can do lessons individually, or you can do lessons with groups. I had a neat experience once. A high school band director in Texas asked if I would lead a sectional for his high school flute students, and I live in Ohio. So he was able to arrange his school to hook up Skype into the band room, and we did a test first, and he was able to get the camera so I could see, a big section of the band room, and he lined up all the flute players, and, it was a real experiment, because I was thinking, how can I really control a group of, it was a small group, it was about 10 flute players, who are all in the same room, and I'm far away, but it was really interesting because I was able to have a successful lesson and really improve their playing and help them with some goals and some questions that they had that made it a worthwhile use of their time, and we were very excited about having that kind of a contact with a group over Skype. Again, you can communicate one way with your students using newsletters. The flute community has quite a few listservs and chat rooms, and I don't know if all instrument groups have these set up, but flute players they're very social, and we like to interact and ask questions, and these listservs and chats can be very, very helpful resources. And so I frequently keep an eye out on what discussions are going on, and sometimes I can make a video that's in response to a question that's going on in one of the flute rooms, or if somebody has a question that relates to something some content I've already created, I can direct people toward that. And then, there are many different services out there, I don't know if any of you have heard of a website called playwithapro.com, where they video record master teachers from all over the world, from major symphonies, giving master classes on different pieces of music or different technical elements, and the students can sort of subscribe and pay a fee and have access to watching those videos. And a lot of those platforms are what we would consider read-only, where the student is not having any opportunity to interact with those teachers, but they get the opportunity to watch the content that's been created. Webinars, of course, like this one that we're doing, is another example of learning, musical learning or consulting learning. And another great resource is violinmasterclass.com, which is an educational website which our panelist Kurt Sussman's house developed, which was really revolutionary and groundbreaking and exciting, and has many, many, many high quality videos of teaching specific techniques, specific repertoire for different levels of students. And I'll let Kurt give some more information about that when I turn the floor over to him. We can go to the next slide. So one of the big questions that I'm always asked is, well, does it really work? And what are the limitations of, specifically related to the webcam teaching, which everybody's very interested in and which I find very exciting, and I do quite a bit of it. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about some of these limitations and what I use to sort of overcome them. One of the issues is that there is a very, very slight delay in the audio, and it's not perceptible when you're speaking, but it's just enough of a delay that, for instance, I cannot clap along with a student. I can't have my metronome playing and the student cannot play along with the metronome. And the other thing I can't do is I can't play along with the student. So that is something I just had to adjust my teaching a little bit, because I'm sort of known for clapping and shouting while the student is playing, and saying the rhythms while the student is playing a passage. And I had to teach myself not to do that, which was a challenge for me as a teacher. And yet I wanted to still convey the same type of energy and the same level of instruction to my web students as I give to my face-to-face students. So simple things, some of it is just like every student has to have their own metronome in the room with them during the lesson. So I may turn my metronome on to find a tempo, but when the student plays, I have to turn my metronome off, and the student has to turn his or her metronome on. And instead of clapping along with a student, sometimes I can use a visual cue, and that seems to be a little bit, work more successfully when I'm trying to convey the energy while the student is playing. Of course, everybody always asks about connection issues. And I find the connection issues are not usually a problem. I very rarely have connection problems. But my policy as a teacher when it comes to web lessons is that I have to offer flexibility to my students. So if there is a connection issue, I just have a policy. I always make up the lesson time at another time. And if we're having a lot of connection issues and it's becoming disruptive to the flow of the lesson, I will sometimes just say to the student, you know what, I don't think we're having a good experience. I don't want you to feel that you didn't have a successful lesson. Let's just stop. reschedule for another day. And I've only really ever had to do that maybe 2 or 3 times. But at the end of the day, I want my students to feel like their money and their time and their energy were well spent. And so I always try to make sure that they know that we will get a good lesson, and if we're having a connection problem, we'll try again later. Physical distance. It is different teaching when you're not in the same room. I mean, I can't walk up to a student and move their hands into a different position if they need correction. I have to demonstrate and show and explain, but I feel that that just adds a new challenge to me as a teacher, and it's my responsibility to communicate in ways so that they can understand what they need to do physically, and it really has not been a problem. Sometimes there are some visual limitations. You know, I'm trying to look at the thumb on the underside of the flute, and I can't quite see it from the camera, and so I may have to ask a student to, you know, turn in a certain direction and face the camera in a different way so that I can see everything I need to. But again, I feel I'm able to really get a lot of information and see really quite well using the webcam. It's really remarkable how much I'm able to feel like I'm really in the same room that I almost forget that I'm not sometimes. The main thing people always ask about is, well, what about the audio quality? And this is the one area that I think there's really not a limitation. I think I can hear extraordinarily well. I never have trouble hearing what I need to hear as a teacher. I can hear very subtle differences in my students' sound quality. I once had a student sign up for a lesson because he was interested in buying a new flute, and he had a whole bunch of flutes that he was trying out and testing, and he wanted my opinion on which one he should buy. And I told him, I said, I cannot promise you that over a microphone that I'll be able to really hear the very fine differences between these professionally made flutes. But we spent about an hour working on it, and I was able to hear and be able to recognize the differences between each of the flutes. Steve?
Yes. Hello? Nina?
Hello? Hi.
Hi, Nina, we can hear you.
Okay, great. My phone was starting to lose its battery power, so I just switched to using the other audio. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Yep.
Okay, excellent. It's always good to have backups for things. That's the other thing about web teaching. So the audio is remarkably successful. I can hear very fine differences, and I don't really find that that's a limit at all. One thing that is different is that you do have a little bit of a different relationship with your student than when you are in the same city. You know, I can't always attend my students' recitals. You know, I have students from all over the world, from Brazil, and I've had students from Saudi Arabia, from Canada, from Ireland, and obviously I can't always attend their concerts and events. So it's a different type of mentorship. But I mean, I have had students who have continued to study with me for many, many years, and I feel that I've watched them grow and I've seen them develop and watched them mature as musicians and artists, and I really feel I have sort of the same mentor relationship with them as I do with many of the students who I see in person. Another limitation of webcam lessons is the sheet music. So, you know, if I'm in the lesson with the student, I can stand next to them, I can look over their shoulder, I can point to music and tell them, you know, what we're working on, but I can't do that when it's webcam lessons. So one of the things I do require is that my students have to tell me ahead of time what music they plan to play for me in a lesson. If it's not a student where I'm assigning them music week to week, I need to know ahead of time what the music is, and I need to have a copy of it pulled from my library and have it handy before I start the lesson, so that during the lesson I can, you know, make comments that are specific and not be trying to say, oh, go back to that one section. You know, I need to be able to to give them specific information about what we're playing. And if I don't own a copy of the music, then I sometimes ask them to just scan a copy for me so that I can visually see what I'm working with during the lesson. It's much, much more effective. And that actually brings me to share with you the platform that I have been using now to do my teaching. And Steve, we can go to the next slide. So I've started using a new platform called Fuzebox, and it is a service that I pay for, but I do enough of this teaching every week that, that it makes sense for me to use this platform, and it really does provide an exceptional experience for my students because, as you can see from this platform, my picture's there on the left. Hello, that's what I look like for those of you who are only hearing my voice. Now, if I'm in a lesson, my student's video will appear just either right above or right below my own video. I didn't take this picture for this webinar with a picture of my student because I always like to respect the privacy of my students, and I didn't have permission to take any of their pictures. But so the two videos are on the left, and then what you see right there in the center of the screen, of course, is the sheet music. So this platform allows me, before the lesson starts or even during the lesson, to upload PDF or JPEG files to the webinar, much like you're looking right now at this PowerPoint presentation that I made for this webinar. It allows my student to see the sheet music, and I can see the sheet music at the same time. But what's even better than just seeing the music is that it actually has a function where there's a laser pointer. So if you can see in the middle of your screen, sort of on the first page, a little more than halfway down, there's like this big red splotch on the middle of the music. And what that is that's actually a red laser pointer that I control and move around with my mouse on the computer. So if a student plays a wrong note, instead of having to say, go to line 3, measure 2, 4th beat, 3rd 16th note, that was a wrong note, and then having to wait while the student finds that spot and it slows down the lesson, I literally just take my laser pointer, point to the note, and I say, that's a wrong note, you need to fix it. Or I can say, this section over here, and point to it, you need to play differently. And it does actually, you can see some smaller red squiggles on the score as well. It allows me to actually take notes on the music during the lesson, and the student can see what I'm writing. So if I want to change the articulations, it looks like in this piece with this student, when I was working on it, I was adding in some slur markings. I can just write them right on the music, and then the student sees that, and the student can then mark in his or her own part the markings that I'm indicating. So I have found that I really enjoy working with this platform much more even than some of the others that are free, because it does provide a really, really effective experience, and it keeps the pace of the lesson more in line with my traditional face-to-face teaching. So Steve, we can go to the next slide. So the thing that is so exciting about virtual teaching is that I really think we're just at the beginning of it. Many students are just starting to be convinced enough that they're willing to try it. There's been a lot of skepticism, and little by little, people are willing to, give it a chance and see if it's successful. So I think there's a huge potential for this, and that many, many students are going to be using virtual tools for their music studies, are already, but even more will continue to use them. But of course, the big question is, do virtual lessons have the potential, to ever replace live lessons? And, in my view, I'm just going to be honest and say no. I don't think that they ever will really replace live lessons. I mean, in looking back at my own formation, I would never have replaced that magical experience of living and studying in Paris with the great master teacher from the Paris Conservatory, simply with webcam lessons. So much of my learning came from more than just you know, the one-on-one hour a week with the teacher. But, you know, I learned so much from hearing and playing with the other students and listening to their lessons and performing duets together and, you know, spending time with my teachers and my fellow students, you know, at the cafe after a day of lessons and talking about what we learned. And, you know, so there's nothing that can fully replace that in-person contact and the immersion of a learning environment like a school of music or conservatory of music. You know, however, I never want to take for granted how lucky I was to have had that opportunity, you know, to study abroad and to study with master teachers and to go to great schools that I went to, like the University of Michigan, the University of Cincinnati Conservatory of Music. You know, I was very, very lucky, and I realized that there are many, many other people who just, for various reasons, don't ever have the opportunity, but could nevertheless benefit from access to the great teachers and to their knowledge, their wealth of knowledge. So in this way, I believe that, you know, the internet does provide an exciting avenue for increased contact and information sharing, and it's a tool that I will continue to use not only for my own teaching, but I also use it for my own professional growth and development and my own learning. I think we can go to the next slide. So you may just want to think about, there are reasons why students want virtual lessons as opposed to in-person lessons, and it can, you know, be geography, that they don't have access to the experts. Some students just want a fresh perspective from a new set of ears and a new teacher. For some students, it's just convenient to not have to leave their house for lessons. Some students want privacy, and they don't want to go to a teacher in their local community. They want to study with somebody maybe who's a little bit more removed. People love the flexibility of being able to schedule lessons on different time zones and from their home. And they can save money on gas and on parking. They certainly don't have to travel for lessons. And, you know, there are a lot of students out there who want to try it just because they think it's cool. And that alone, you know, makes it exciting for them. So we can go to the next slide. So this next slide really can be a webinar in itself, so I'm not really going to get into it because we could do a whole topic on this, but a lot of it is not different from the traditional way of getting students. Word of mouth. People do your lessons, they like it, they have a good experience, they tell other people, other teachers will recommend you. What is your general reputation in the profession? Do you, hold a position with the symphony? Are you a college teacher? That will draw students to wanting to have the opportunity to take lessons with you. And then, of course, you can use technology to generate awareness of who you are as a teacher and what you offer. And that, again, is the topic of another webinar. I actually led a webinar for polyphonic.org on branding and using technology, so it's probably in the archives. Steve, you could let people know if they want to go back and listen to one of those webinars. But again, it's very similar to how things went in the more traditional stage, except now you can use social networking and technology to tell people that you have these kinds of lessons and offerings available. And I think with the last slide, I think we're ready for the last slide. So thank you, everyone. Good luck. I hope this was helpful. And feel free to email me or visit me on my website.
Great, thanks, Nina. And Kurt, I think it's your turn if you have some follow-up comments.
Yeah, sure, I do. And I can explain a few things that we do that go along with many of the things that Nina said. Nina, thank you so much. That was great, very informative, and I learned a lot. So I teach violin at the College Conservatory of Music in Cincinnati, University of Cincinnati. If you detect a slight accent, I was born and raised in Germany and went for graduate studies to the Juilliard School to study with Dorothy DeLay, and then shortly thereafter came to Cincinnati to start teaching, and it was a very lucky event. So in 2004, I published the violinmasterclass.com website. That is 175 videos of how to play the violin, and each of the categories, so for example, spiccato or vibrato, is first explained as a definition, and then with exercises in different degrees of difficulty, then you can see a section of a master class, and you can see one of the students perform a piece with that technique. Now, according to Nina's list, that is of course a read-only event. Students go in and they say, oh, I want to learn about staccato, how do I start this? And they look it up, and then they practice what's there, and then they go to the next exercise. That has been successful. We proudly say that we published this a few months before YouTube even started. Our goal was slightly different, but it's getting a lot of hits. We had to reconfigure the website because it was almost 10 years old. We reconfigured it last year, and as a result of that, we hosted all of the videos on YouTube. And within the last year, we got over 6 million visits on this site. We can statistically look where those visits come from, what ages these people are, and so on. And I have a little bit of anecdotal evidence that is actually working very well, and people like to use it. The only thing that's interactive is people can sign up for our email list, and we do have an email list where we send out a monthly newsletter. One thing I found very interesting on the analytics, it goes to Google Analytics, that by now 31% of the visits come from handheld devices. So people watch these things on their cell phones as well as on tablet computers. Anecdotal evidence is that, for example, I was judging a competition in Germany in November, and many of the contestants and contestants' parents, there were several age groups in that competition, came up to me and told me that their children, their students, had watched Violin Masterclass a lot. Last year I was at a conference of the European String Teachers Association in England, and a representative from the island of Malta, which is a small island in the Mediterranean, came up to me and said, you know, we are so remote, we would not get this information. What I was trying to do with violinmasterclass.com is to put out the information that is usually only available if you are in one of the better violin classes in the world, and the things that I learned from my teachers both in Germany, in Cologne, and at the Juilliard School. I tried to incorporate as much of that in a website as I could. And we find that oftentimes people in very remote areas flock to this site because they can get the information there. We also find that even in places in the world that are dangerous, war zones or civil wars, that people really still flock to the website, and I hope it gives them a moment of art and peace in their lives. We opened one new tab on this, which is called VMC Live, and that has to do with live violin lessons. So I teach on the site, as well as some of my current and former students. Again, that goes all over the world. One of my former students is teaching a lot of lessons from Australia, and she's actually teaching a lot of people in the Pacific Rim, but all the way into areas of India, Afghanistan, and so on. That's quite exciting, and it shows that, as Tom Friedman said in his book, that the world is really flat by virtue of the internet. And in 2005, I started a summer music festival in Beijing called the Great Wall International Music Academy, and one girl showed up. She was 10 years old, and she lives in Brunei, and that is on an island in the Pacific Ocean. Brunei is a principality of its own, and she played very beautifully. She's very talented, but she said she just doesn't have a teacher. And I said, well, let's do it via Skype. And so for 2 years I've been teaching her via Skype. She comes back in the summer to Great Wall, and by now we have enrolled her in the preparatory department at our school here in Cincinnati, but her lessons are exclusively by Skype. Nina had mentioned that there is a certain delay, and that is true. If I turn my metronome on, then she can only play with the beat that she hears, which is a little bit delayed. We're going to try in one of our next concerts to have her play through internet, loudspeakers, and a video connection with our young orchestra. And in this case, we can see and hear her in our time, which will be slightly delayed from where it starts, but she will have to turn her volume all the way down. Otherwise, she's going to hear what we do together with her, yet with another delay, and she won't be able to play anymore because that's too confusing. But I think that might actually work. What I found when Nina was talking about sound quality, I found it actually surprisingly good, and it makes a big difference to have a pair of good speakers connected to the computer, and then the sound quality gets immediately better. I can also, I've used this technology via Skype to teach my own university students from abroad. So if I travel and I have somebody who needs to play for me because they have a concert coming up or a competition, I can still be in touch with them. And just very quickly, a few other uses of the internet. We have a secret Facebook group within my class. So if I want to get a message out to only my students, or somebody there wants to get a message out to the whole class, they can do that via this Facebook group. I have my schedule, my weekly schedule, published on a Google Drive document, and my students have are authorized to go in there and change the lesson times so they can talk to each other and switch lesson times. Then I ask that they send me an email if they do, but I can, this way everybody can have up-to-date information as to what's happening with the schedule. And one of the things we use the internet for a lot is on YouTube. By now you have so many pieces in so many different varieties that I ask my students to go there and make we call them timesheets. They're really pacing sheets in many pieces, especially in the romantic repertoire. Tempo changes every section or every few bars sometimes. And if they clock with a metronome certain performers, they can make a chart. This performer at letter B gets this tempo, and the other performer at the same letter gets another tempo. And this way they get a pretty good sense of what can be done, and it is so much easier than it was when I was studying. We had to buy not CDs because they weren't out yet. We had to buy LPs, and that was almost prohibitively expensive to do. So those are some of the uses of the internet that I've experimented with, and I am mainly excited about the possibility of the lessons that actually work really, really well. And I have an appointment tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock with this girl in Brunei, and it is 9 o'clock evening for her at that time. But the lessons have been working well, and for 2 years. So thank you very much for joining our webinar. Nina, thank you very much for setting up. Steve, thank you for inviting me to this, and I guess we are ready for some questions.
Wonderful. Yeah, thanks, Kurt, and thanks again to Nina for all your thoughts and expertise. Obviously a really interesting topic, and Nina, like you said, there's any number of topics within it that we could talk for a long time about. But I do want to give people a chance to ask some questions, and we have a bunch in here, so I'm going to go right into it. There's been a couple of questions about basically how do you coordinate payments with online lessons? You know, because obviously the person is not there. How do you guys do that?
Well, I just use PayPal. It's very simple to set up, and I just followed the instructions and created a link that's on my website. And I require that the student pay before the actual lesson, and it works very easily.
Yeah, I usually do it through, we have a not-for-profit foundation that hosts the violin masterclass, and they can do it in a number of ways. They can go through PayPal, they can do it via credit card, they can also press the donate button on the violinmasterclass.com, and then they get credit card, they can fill in their credit card information that way. It hasn't been a problem, even from countries that have internet firewalls like China or so. The payments have not been problems.
Great. Yeah, sort of a related question here is, how do you decide on your rates for these lessons, and are they different for, what you were saying in terms of like a read, React lesson versus a read React Now lesson?
Yeah, I used to do video exchange and charge less than an actual webcam lesson, and I did that for a few years and had quite a few students that way, but actually at the end I found out that it was taking me as much time, or if not more time, than to do the video exchange as it was just to do the actual webcam lessons. So I ended up making the pricing more equal. And I don't really have very many video exchange students anymore. Pretty much all my students now are just webcam lessons, which is preferable if the student is able to work out the scheduling so that you can meet at the same day and time. I do think it's a better experience. But on occasion, if a student really wants the flexibility of just doing a one-time video exchange, I will give them feedback that way as well.
Yeah, and I had just about the same kind of experience with the exchanges. So we took the exchanges off the Violin Masterclass site, but the prices we charge for me and also for the other people who are teaching there are actually the same prices that we would charge for an in-person in the same room lesson. There's no difference.
Same for me too. My webcam lessons are the same as for my students who meet me in Cincinnati.
Great, okay, and then a person here has asked how many lessons per week would need to be offered to justify the cost of the Fuzebox service, or maybe another service like that.
I can't remember what the current pricing is on Fuzebox because they just changed it, and actually they lowered it, which I was really happy about. So I think it might be $20 a month or something for Fuzebox, but I don't quote me on that. You can go to their website and look up the pricing, and then you just have to figure out how many students you want. My teaching schedule varies. It's not the same every single week because I have some students who just contact me for a one-time coaching before a competition, and some students who do lessons every month or lessons every week. But I keep the service, even if I have less lessons, I always keep the service because to me it's about giving the student an exceptional experience. Every time they have a lesson with me, they know what they're going to get and what they're going to expect. So to me it's an investment that I'm making in my teaching all the time.
Great. We probably have time for one or two more questions. So another one here, and Nina, you mentioned this a little bit. The question is, how can you advertise yourself as an online teacher without spending much money?
Well, that again is a whole topic for another webinar, but the short answer is that you don't have to spend a lot of money. You have a choice. You can spend money or time. So when I got started, I spent a lot of time creating free videos and free content and free blogs that I put out there. It didn't cost me a lot of money because I didn't hire anybody else to do it for me. I did it all myself, but it took a lot of time. But it was worth it, and it ended up very much being worth it financially and in terms of my time. The thing that I think is funny is when people come and ask me, well, how can I become an internet celebrity, or how can I improve my, people's awareness of me and what I do without spending any money and without investing any time? And my answer to them is, you can't. Life doesn't work that way. You have to invest something. You have to work hard at what we do. And if you really truly don't have the time, you can try taking out Google advertisements and paying for Facebook post boosts, and you can invest financially to see if you can generate some traffic that way if you really don't have the time. And if you really don't have the money, then you can invest the time, but something is going to have to be put into that effort if you want to get any results.
Yeah, I would second that. I think it would take a lot of time, but there are many free ways of doing it. I mean, you can build up a Facebook base, you can build up, you can write blogs that get noticed. There are a number of ways. YouTube videos, the more you have out there, the more you'll get noticed. So that just takes a lot of time. And with violinmasterclass.com, we get so many hits that of course drives traffic now towards us. But that was in the beginning both time-consuming and expensive. So that's I think without putting a good amount of time in, it's unrealistic to expect that you'd have a presence on the internet where people will recognize you easily. You just have to work on it really hard.
Great. And before we wrap up, I just want to mention Kurt's website again, because a couple people have asked for the address. And Kurt, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's violinmasterclass.com.
Yeah, www.violinmasterclass.com is all one word. And you'll get there, and then if you see that bar where it says Masterclasses, if you click on Masterclasses, it opens up all of these Masterclasses, right hand, left hand, and you get into the subdivisions of it. So please enjoy.
Great. Well, it's about time for us to wrap up. So I want to thank Nina and Kurt for a really interesting presentation, and then for all the information that they provided, for taking the time to share this with us. And certainly thank you all for joining us tonight. Nina and Kurt, any last words you want to leave us with?
No, but I just want to say if anybody has questions for me that we didn't cover, feel free. You can go to my website, realfluteproject.com, and click Contact Me or something where you can get my email address and send me a message.
Yeah, same here. I can reach through violinmasterclass.com or through University of Cincinnati, through the faculty roster quite easily. And most importantly, keep practicing. That really makes it better.
Practice makes perfect, right?
At least close to
okay,
it.
great. Well, thanks again,
Yeah.
to everyone. And again, check polyphonic.org for our upcoming webinars, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Good night.
Good night.